Hey there. Welcome to the Pine Island Experience podcast. I'm Joanna Anderson with my husband, Trygve. Each of our episodes will be conversations with fellow Pine Islanders.
The goal of our podcast is to share with you our experiences, what we have found to be fun, and what makes the Pine Island experience so unique.
We knew we wanted to go to Florida. We didn't really know where exactly. We thought about the Cocoa Beach area, but then I remembered Sanibel Island. My husband and I had a condo in Sanibel for a little bit in the late 90s. And I said, well, what if we went that way? I remember Cape Coral. And then eventually through realtors asking us what we wanted, what we were looking for, we found Pine Island. And it's the perfect spot for us because I find Fort Myers and Cape Coral to be very suburban, whereas this is still very old Florida. And the pace is what we wanted. And so this is where we ended up in St. James City.
That was Joanne Lembo, our good friend, neighbor, and guest this week. Joanne is a great example of Pine Island Strong. She enjoys helping others because it brings her purpose. Right after Hurricane Ian, she dedicated her time and used her experience to help islanders navigate FEMA, the Red Cross, Unite Florida, and other organizations that were aiding hurricane survivors. And now, here's Joanne. Well, welcome, Joanne, and thank you. We're so honored that you're here today. We're glad you're our first guest since 2020. It's not that bad. We were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Joanne Lembo, and originally I am from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We moved around a lot because of my job. I worked for the federal government. So it's been a while since I've actually had any residence in Pennsylvania. So we came down to the Georgia area. That's what kind of brought us down here. And we lived in Savannah first. And then we moved to Darien, which is about an hour south of Savannah. It's like an old shrimping village off of St. Simon's Island and Jekyll Island. So when it came time for me to retire, my husband who has already been retired, we decided to come down to Florida. My background, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I wanted to get into radio. That was my first thing. I wanted to be like a newscaster and ended up in law enforcement. So it kind of took a twist. The times on the radio was fantastic. I learned a lot, but there was a time when I was divorced and I was a single parent. My daughter was about 9 months old, so I had to get a real job that really gave me a good salary, good benefits, and I started as a probation officer in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And I did that for about 3 years, and someone told me, you could make more money as a state parole officer. So I went downtown Pittsburgh, looked for the state building, ended up at the federal building, and I took a test there. And that's how I got to work for the federal government. And my first job with the federal government was with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which no longer exists, but I was an inspector. And that job entailed working at all ports of entry, airports, seaports, land borders, train stations. And I started at the Pittsburgh International Airport with international flights. And that's when I just took off. I went down to the southern border in California. I worked at the Seattle Seaport in Washington State, came back. It was hard to be on your own being a single parent because of the hours that you worked. You worked a lot of shifts and you did a lot of call outs. So came back home to Pittsburgh, went back there, and then opportunities just started opening up. And I got promoted several times, did a lot of overseas work. And yes, it was phenomenal. It was a big growing experience. The embassy at Ottawa was huge because I was scared to death because I had an ambassador that was really good friends with President Bush, and is the first political arena that I went into. And I got to know him. He was pretty phenomenal. And so I did work there, and that opened up a lot of doors for me, meeting people, because I was tracking terrorists. And that was one of my biggest jobs, was tracking terrorists across the northern border. And I learned a lot about politics. I learned a lot of mistakes that I made when I was there, because being political is an art, and they know everything about it. I tended to be kind of honest, and not that politicians aren't honest, but you don't speak the way that I spoke and not have ramifications afterwards. So, and then from there, everything just took off. And I worked, we changed to Customs and Border Protection after 9/11. And I worked back on the southern border. I became a port director. And then my last years, I worked at our academy in Brunswick, Georgia, as a training person, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And that's when I got to go overseas, and I got to do a lot of international work. And then when it came time to find a place to live after retirement, we knew we wanted to go to Florida. We didn't really know where exactly. We thought about the Cocoa Beach area, but then I remembered Sanibel Island. My husband and I had a condo in Sanibel for a little bit in the late 90s. And I said, well, what if we went that way? I remember Cape Coral. And then eventually through realtors asking us what we wanted, what we were looking for, we found Pine Island. And it's the perfect spot for us, because I find Fort Myers and Cape Coral to be very suburban, whereas this is still very old Florida. And the pace is what we wanted. And so this is where we ended up, in St. James City.
Wow, that's a great story. It's a good thing that you didn't go to the state building that you went to the federal building. Well, that was meant to be then, right? It's
pretty funny. It's funny when you think about it. Like I walked in there and I said, well, this is close enough. Federal, state, what's the difference, And yeah, my career was very eye-opening. I grew up a lot. I never thought I would do the things that I did. Carrying a gun, learning how to shoot. I didn't grow up with that in my life. My dad wasn't a hunter. I didn't grow up with that. So for me, it was like learning from base. And I was actually 31 when I started, which is really kind of old when a lot of kids were coming out of college or military and getting in, in their 20s. But I had a great career, learned a lot, saw a lot, opened my eyes a lot, because I think I grew up very sheltered where I came from in Pittsburgh. And it's funny now when I look at things, how different I look at things. And maybe that's not a good thing sometimes, but it's a jaded kind of thing in a sense. But it's a realistic. Sometimes I wish I didn't have it, because I look down that road first. But it was great. It was a great career, and I would have recommended it for anybody, especially women, because it was a very difficult thing, still is, for women to excel in. Even after all the strides that women make, it's still a glass ceiling there. And I always had to try more. I always had to be better. I became their first firearms director at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center.
From not knowing anything about firearms, you became the director.
And not even a good shooter. I was not a good shooter. And then I learned. And then when I supervised all these firearms instructors, they taught me so much. And that was a big part of being a supervisor, is learning. And I was the first female there. And I think that helped a lot, because a lot of women were afraid of weapons, and a lot of women failed out because of that. So I think I added a little bit more, because when you're a good shooter, You don't really think about a person's weak spots because you're so good. Sometimes you just can't do it. So I would watch and I would kind of rein them in and say, maybe you should talk to her about this or that. And that's how we worked it. But it was a great career. I'm very lucky that I got to do and see what I did.
In all these places you worked, did you move there or did you stay in Pittsburgh and travel there, or both?
Both. Some places you had to relocate.
Okay.
Some places were, it was. And even there were some places that you did details, or TDYs, they called them. And I was gone for about a year and a half one time, which was difficult. I had since remarried. And of course, my husband still had his job. My daughter was in high school, but they both understood. And I went, and I just went from spot to spot, to get experience, so that I could be better or I could promote out, because you can't stay in one spot and be effective as far as I was concerned. I mean, you can stay in a spot, but I don't think you're as effective. So the biggest things that I really appreciated was the overseas travel, because there's no way in the world I would have done that without working for the government. There's no way.
In the world.
Right.
No way in the world.
No way in the world. No, because
amazing.
It was amazing. It's funny, I get real emotional when I talk about Africa, because I was there 3 times, and it's just an experience that I think people have to do. I can't even explain it. It's just, I don't know. You just have to see it to believe it. It's an unbelievable experience. So I'm very grateful for that.
If we can circle back just a little bit, I've always been interested in what they don't teach you in school and how that applies overall to business. So please don't say anything that you can't or shouldn't about politics, but maybe you can discuss some of the learning curve and how you adapted to navigate through politics.
Right. So I had some law enforcement experience being a probation officer. So when I ventured into the federal level, it was much different, because the eyes on are different than local politicians or local officers or local people, because now you're dealing with consulates and you're dealing with embassies and you're dealing with lawyers, and you have to learn how to interview correctly, how to record that interview, because they're going to look at your paperwork. I mean, if somebody travels 10 hours to come to some place and you know that they can't enter the country, and you're going to bar them, you're going to tell them, no, you can't come in today. You have to be able to articulate, reasonably. You have to talk about why you're doing it. You have the power. You definitely have the power, but you have to say, this is why. And I had a very good supervisor when I first started in Pittsburgh. And my interviews, back then, we didn't have computers, so everything was handwritten. And he did a lot of corrections in my summaries, because this paperwork was going to be sent to whatever country these people were from for an officer to review. And you can't come across, not without basis. And that's one thing I really learned. It didn't matter what I felt. You can feel something. You can think that something isn't right, but you have to base it on articulable fact. And that was a big thing that I learned. That was when I first began. And then I actually entered into interviewing refugees, and I did a lot of international students in schools. Again, you have to find why you're doing what you're doing. And I worked with a lot of good attorneys, a lot of immigration attorneys that were willing, because we're on the opposite end of the spectrum, to teach, what you need to know. So yes, I would say my school, my college didn't really give you all the skills. It gave you some, but it didn't give you all the skills for the real world and the politics, because there's politics everywhere and every job that you do, And I tell my daughter this the same thing. It doesn't matter what field you get into. There's a way that you speak with people. There's a way that you communicate with people for you to get what you need and what you get done. And there are many times in my job, especially as a port director, when you get to that higher level where you want to do something. You know what's right. You know right from wrong, obviously. But you have a whole cavalcade of people above you in Washington, D.C., with eyes on. So you have to find the way to do it correctly, but you still have to do it because it's the right thing to do. It's not always popular. You have to be very strong. And that was the other thing, too. I think you have to get that strength. You have to get that clarity and lose that fear. And you have to know your thing for it to be done correctly. And that's something that isn't taught. That's something that you gain through the years.
Considering all that work, this may be a shorter answer. Did you have time for hobbies or other interests you were developing along the way? Given the pressures that were very time consuming, especially being gone at 18 months at one stint, but did you have any downtime outside of work?
Well, I used to really love to run. I don't run anymore because my knees are shot, but I used to love to run. It helped me clear my head. And when I had time to be outside, that was my favorite, to run outside. I didn't like to run inside in the gym or anything. However, to your point, working as many hours as we did, and when I worked at Pittsburgh International Airport, we actually developed a program, and it was a health improvement program, and you could participate, and you were allowed to have so many minutes a week to work out in your off time on duty. So we had a gym. We had a small little gym, but I also ran the hallway. I ran from when the passengers came out of international down to the customs side, and I would just run when I had time because it does release your stress. It does give you some clarity if you're working out a problem. So that was one of my major things I like to do was run. Other than that, I had my daughter to take care of. I had a lot of things that I had to do. It was hard to develop hobbies. There's so many things that you have to work on when you're an officer. Shooting was another thing. I had to, make time to be proficient because we qualified 4 times a year. And you don't want to lose your weapon. You can't lose your weapon. So,
how did the eating go? As someone that traveled long hours or the travel itself, you don't sit down for meals at the same time every day. I personally did a lot of junk food. You just end up grabbing food whenever you can get it.
Well, and you're right, especially with our job, we really didn't have a lunch hour per se. We didn't even have really a lunch half hour. We took the time when we could. So not to fall into that trap, because at airports especially, it was very, very easy to go anywhere and get anything. So I would bring something from home. I'd bring a salad. I'd bring soup. I'd bring something. And then we had microwaves and things that we could make it in. But yeah, that's a hard thing not to fall into. And especially when you worked in the midnight shift, it was horrible because nobody wanted to, I hated midnight shift because all you wanted to do, I wanted to sleep. I never really got into that shift. A lot of people did, but it really throws you off of everything. So no, I kind of ventured away from that because you couldn't. A lot of people did. A lot of people gained a lot of weight, developed some habits that weren't healthy. Drinking was a huge thing to bring yourself down or relax. That was always accepted, no matter what they called it, choir practice. And, after working 12 hours or 14 hours, instead of just going home and going to sleep, maybe you go home and have a glass of wine or you have a glass of beer or you have hard alcohol. Whatever the case is, alcoholism was high. And that, again, went with the stress and the hours of the job. Smoking was a big one, because it's just your way of, however, coffee drinking was huge. So yeah, you can fall into that trap. And I remember I had a port director when I was early on, and he said to me, be careful when as you go up in your career, because, drinking, smoking, eating bad, and divorce was another thing that was very, very high among officers, because a lot of times they were away from their families. A lot of times they spent more time with people, wherever they were. And that was especially true at the academy, because the academy, your basic training is 6 months long, and you are living away from home, and your family doesn't come with you.
So you've mentioned your progression from Pennsylvania to eventually Pine Island. When did you actually arrive on Pine Island?
We actually physically moved October 2019. We had sold our house in Georgia in August of 2019, and we hadn't closed yet, so we came here to look for a house. We had been looking, but we hadn't bought anything. So we came here, went under contract, went back home. And I remember the first night I was home, my realtor in Georgia called me and said, "You're not going to believe this. The couple that, is under contract with your house here in Georgia, the woman died. She just died. She died on an airplane, and she had a heart attack, and she was younger than me." I said, "Are you kidding me?" What a sign. Yeah. He said, "No, but the man still wants to buy the house, but we're just going to have to delay the closing a week if that's okay." I said, "Whatever he needs, I don't care." But the sad part of that whole story is the woman, the guy's wife, who bought the house with him, wrote me a letter when they went under contract. I still have the letter. And she said that she loved my house so much because of my art, because she was from New Mexico. And I used to live in New Mexico at one point. And she said, "But what really sealed the deal for me was you had the Virgin Mary statue in the same place, in the same corner of the bedroom that I do." And she said, "That's what made me buy your house." She said, "I've looked at homes everywhere." And she said, "That's why we decided to buy the house." And it was very touching, because I thought, yes. And we did go back after the evacuation up to Georgia, and I met the man. I finally met him face to face and talked to him a little bit. He and his daughter now live in that house.
It gives you goosebumps. He was brave to move in there, was?
Yep, he came from New Jersey. But that letter just touched me so much. And then when I found out that she had passed away, she was coming back from a business trip and a heart attack. She just had a heart attack on a plane and died. And God bless her. I keep those things like very close to me. Those are the little things that I love about life, right? Like just the little things that you really appreciate, especially when you get older, what's important. And especially after the hurricane, what was really important. Yes, we are full-time here on the island.
That's just a question for everybody.
What do you like about living on Pine Island, now that we're speaking about it?
What's funny is before the hurricane, I was starting when I first got here, it was very kind of exciting, right? Because I had a pool, and I could, go in that pool, and I could do what I wanted to do. And I went from like a 4,000 square foot house to a 1,000 square foot house, which was great. I didn't have to worry about all the maintenance. And then as time went on, and of course, that was during the COVID time, it became a little bit more frustrating. Even though we were very fortunate that where we lived, we could be outside, no matter if we were around people or not, we still had the ability to enjoy the sunshine and the healthy part of living in Florida. But right before the hurricane, I thought, I don't know. Is this enough? Because I'm a person that needs purpose. I always probably will. My husband is more laid back. He's happy doing his thing. He likes going around helping people because he's very mechanically inclined. And I just thought, boy, I wish I had something to do. I wish I had more purpose. Should I have moved closer to my daughter and the grandkids? And then the hurricane happened. And that's, to answer your question, I liked the island before the hurricane, but I fell in love with the island after the hurricane because of what I saw in people. I mean, there's bad people and there's good people, but I really saw people giving everything to people. I mean, when I came back after evacuation, I couldn't believe food. I mean, the amount of food that was being cooked and given to people, ice trucks. The first time I went to the Baptist church on 8th Avenue, they had all those supplies and people were just handing. I said, I don't want this. And they said, yes, you do. You want this, you need this. And I met the head of FEMA there and he said, listen, you pay taxes your entire life. He said, you're not asking. He said, you need it now. And that's a hard thing to admit, right? That you need help. So that's what I really love about the island. They have a sense of generosity and a sense of belonging. They don't exclude you. Sometimes, there's always that little fight between the snowbirds and the full-time residents. But for the most part, if you're an islander, you're an islander. And they appreciate that. They understand your way of thinking. They're not people of means. They are the people that have lived on this island for generations live because it's the island. They don't want the affluent lifestyle. They want to be islanders. They want to fish when they want to fish. They want to do what they want to do. And they're happy to get by with what they have, which you have to admit, it's a beautiful place. It's very still untouched commercially. So
what were or are some of your favorite places, or are there places coming back that you're looking forward to? What do you like to do on the island? Or
that's so sad that I don't even have a hobby on the island, but I like to walk, as you well know. I like that. What I really got into when they looked for volunteers to get people signed up for the state, of course, there was FEMA. And then Governor DeSantis came up with Unite Florida, and they were looking for volunteers. And that's what really opened up my world, because I got to know people here on the island. Because before that, I would do things here and there. I was trying to figure out, where should I volunteer? I don't know. I mean, I was dog walking.
Yeah. I mean, you're a big lover of dogs. I thought that would come up with your hobby. But your dogs are beautiful.
Oh, my dogs are like part of my life. So they're like not even a hobby now. But I think the dog walking thing, it was just so far off the island. That's one of the challenges, right? Living on the island is being just far enough away where there's a lot of traffic. The dog walking was great. However, there were so many people that were doing it that you kind of got in the way of other people. And it was more frustrating than helpful. So I kind of felt like I was in the way. I went to work at Leoma Lovegrove's gallery for a little bit. I didn't enjoy, I love her work. I just did not enjoy, the retail thing. So I felt kind of like at loose ends, what do I do with myself?
Well, you said you needed a purpose.
I do. So, I really do.
I think you found it, but I know you found it, a real purpose to what you wanted to do with the rest of your life.
Well, I will tell you, I believe, and it was part of our training. I would teach a lot of leadership things internationally. And one of the things they talk about behavioral styles, but you always have to have a purpose. There's always the why to a person. And that's me. I need a purpose, whatever that purpose may be. I never thought about that. When I was working, I thought, who wants to work all the time, right? Who wants? But you need that. I need that purpose. So when they were looking for volunteers, there were 2 attorneys at the Beacon of Hope, and one of which was retired immigration attorney. So we laughed about that for a while. And the other one was a retired insurance attorney. But I met other volunteers that came there. There was just a small handful. 2 people came from Punta Gorda every day. Yeah, they came because they felt, that's why I love these people, because they felt they needed to help people. One lady is here part-time, and she was a retired school teacher. And when I first met her, I thought, boy, she's so quiet. And after you got to know her, it was hysterical because the people we would get in at the Beacon, it was, you never knew what you were going to get. Because it's just the way this island is. There's no cutoff time for drinking. There's no beginning or end. And I actually worked out of the Legion for a big part of it. And that really opened my eyes because I do belong to the Legion. I don't go there a lot. I probably should go there more. But I got to know the commander and all the people there. And I remember my husband saying to me, aren't they more concerned about their homes than the Legion? I said, no, because that's their people. That's their family. Every day. I mean, it was just so amazing getting to know these people. They knew they had problems, obviously. But if they didn't have that, that was like their lifeline. That was their way of talking and getting all this. The first man I met there lost his house and his wife the night of the hurricane. So, I can't even imagine that. And they actually had a funeral service for her a few weeks after the hurricane. So just when you think you're like pretty devastated for what you went through, there's so much. There's so much out there.
And I don't think anybody wants to go through a natural disaster. I think we'd all vote for having been excluded from that. But I think what's been reassuring to us, and I think you kind of alluded to this, is when everybody was outside working on their homes or in their yards. So you could make an argument community's overused, too much in today's society, but it really seemed to tighten up. From our perspective, and you saw the kindnesses and you saw the willingness to help even when their own properties or homes weren't in the best of shape. If there was something heavy, multiple people were doing that. I assume you saw much of the same kinds of things.
Yes, that was in our neighborhood. It was amazing. I knew some people here, really, just talking to them, but I didn't know them. And, just for myself, I didn't have a washing machine for months because we couldn't get the golf cart out of the garage. So, I had 2 neighbors here say, please come here, wash your clothes. I don't care. I felt really funny about that because there were public washers and dryers, but they wanted it. They wanted to give that. And then I understand. That I wanted the same thing. I wanted to help people too. Everybody in this neighborhood has been fantastic. I got to know my neighbors 2 doors down. They had us for Thanksgiving. They had us for Christmas. They had us for Easter. We've really gotten close in that respect because they felt they're by themselves. You shouldn't be by yourself. And I think that's everybody's mindset here. You can't be by yourself. If you want to be by yourself, that's okay. But we want to help you because we care about you. And it's not that fake care. It's a really, truly nice thing. And I couldn't tell you how much money everybody does have in this neighborhood. I couldn't tell you if somebody was wealthy or not. Obviously, you have to be able to afford. This has gotten to be more expensive as time goes on. But nobody has that facade. Everybody has that down-to-earth, kind of thing where we can laugh at the end of the day. And I remember saying to you, Joanna, thank you for being so kind. Because there are some people that aren't. There really aren't. But thank you, because I came back after, and at first I was just like a deer in a headlight. It was very devastating. We had about 18 inches of water, right? And I thought, how are we going to get past this? All the money that you save, everything, your whole career, your retirement. And then all of a sudden I realized like I wasn't alone. And I think that was a big deal. Everybody was going through something. It wasn't exactly the same, but everybody was having something go on. And I think we all helped each other.
I think we had to be more assertive with other people and just say, no, you need me to help you. Yeah. And we had a friend, I don't know how he did it. He would just appear and then help us. And I said, how did he do that? That's uncanny. Help us take down a tree. Or we would go and help other people. And we really, like you, we became a lot closer to our neighbors.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And another reason I wanted to volunteer so badly, I worked for the government. I have hit every brick wall in my job possible. I have been through a lot in different aspects, so I understand the government. I understand their speak. I understand how to deal with it. So, starting from the fact that FEMA wasn't here originally, they weren't physically here, and people actually had to pick up their phones and try to apply over the phone. That's when I started calling senators and congressmen and say, look, we're not in Fort Myers. You have a place there, but it might as well be across the country because people, A, don't have a car anymore, B, can't get off the island, and a lot of elderly people don't even have access to computers and don't even know how.
Well, there wasn't even an internet in the beginning.
Right. And that was the other thing, was the communications, right? So the one person's office, Marco Rubio's office, they're like, we never thought about that. And I said, well, no, because you aren't here. Until you're here and see see how far everything is, you can't just, skip and jump down to Fort Myers because you can't. So I was advocating, and that's one of my favorite things to do, is to advocate and like kind of push people along, because there's a lot of fear with the government, a lot of fear with not doing the right thing, or what's going to happen if I don't do this, right? So I like to say, no, we're going to do this. We're going to appeal this, or it's not a big deal. We're going to do this. And a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people just cried, because you have to hear the story. I mean, when they first had all us volunteers doing this, they thought it was going to be very quick. Here, answer this. Well, no. We'd spend 2 hours with somebody because they had to tell you this story. They had to. Who else are they going to tell? And then if you're telling it to somebody outside this area, they don't understand. I mean, we were on the news, maybe that week, and then that's it.
I think it's interesting you mentioned government speak, because although the documents or the forms or the websites are technically in English, I don't think they're in everyday English, let alone people that have suffered a trauma. And one of the things we commented on, and I think you've alluded to it too, is so you had the damage at your own home, mm-hmm. but every time we looked outside, you saw more devastation. Mm-hmm. And, thank God most stuff is cleaned up now. But to your point, not only the time to make that trip, but you just drove along and you saw house after house and tree after tree that were down, et cetera. And it just compounded to the point where, and I think I remember you telling or sharing with us earlier that it was as simple as sometimes people check on the wrong box mm-hmm. or something, and that was not getting them the help that they need. So maybe if you can expand on that a little bit more, sure. on how that got facilitated. And
we'd get a lot of people coming in saying, we were denied by FEMA from the beginning. And I'd say, in what way? A lot of times it was a misunderstanding that if they had insurance, they had to wait until the settlement, and then FEMA wanted to know what wasn't covered. But another aspect, like you were saying, on their form, on the applications, if you were doing it over the phone, and a lot of people did do it over the phone, and I don't know, they said they had insurance or they didn't have insurance, the person on the other end checked the wrong box. Mm-hmm. And it's simple to do. But we were finding that more and more and more. And I said, so we would call FEMA on their behalf, have that person there and say, this was done incorrectly. Oh. And this is, by that time, FEMA had been here, have them come to the tent. And for a lot of people, that was scary to face people because some people aren't the most people friendly, government workers. You would think, and I remember talking to the guy from FEMA, I said, you'd think you get the most compassionate people, right? You get the best. And he started laughing because most of the FEMA people are on call. They're not full-time workers. So you basically sign up, they train you, and then when a disaster happens, they deploy you. And so a lot of times, they don't understand or they're not sure or they can't answer your question. I had a lot of compassionate people I talked to. I was lucky. A lot of FEMA workers were very, very understanding and very helpful. Same with the Small Business Association, which was another entity, that people dealt with too. But I felt, and it's funny when I think back to the beginning of all this, there were a couple times when I really thought I was going to lose my mind. I'm going, really? I don't believe these people are talking like this. Or, I don't think I can do this. I just don't. I'm tired of doing this. And then you kind of step outside and where I was staying in Georgia, that's where I was. And I kind of just took a walk, just a little walk, and then came back and then started over again. But I think it's worse, to your point, if you were here, because you could get outside, but what are you looking at? You're looking at even more stuff and more sadness and more frustration. So it's hard to get your mind set on money. I mean, that's what it came down to, is trying to find money to repair your home, if you could repair your home. I knew nothing about a surge. I had no idea what a surge was. I knew wind. I'd assumed wind, but I never thought about a surge and how much damage it could do. And it was amazing how much damage it did. I think we were fortunate as well. I mean, we had a lot of damage, but we were able to recoup. A lot of people couldn't. So, yeah, I was lucky that I had that background, that it makes you resilient. It really does. After a while, you just get to the point where, in my case, I compartmentalize a lot. That's my personality. I tend to put things in boxes, and when it comes out later, it comes out. But it's how I deal with things. So I'm able to deal with the issue at hand instead of, getting the emotion involved. I have to suppress it and then go.
It was so great of you to share those talents that you had, because we really needed it on the island. I know a lot of people we met, they said, well, I'm not as bad off as this person. So they weren't going to do anything at all. Or they were rejected for whatever reason. A lot of the systems, the computer systems weren't working right with the agencies you were talking to. And they'd say, well, I was denied and that's it. I'm not getting anything. And then that wasn't even the case. You even told us you have to, what did you call it? Appeal. Yeah. Who knows to appeal unless you hadn't said, oh no, you just have to appeal.
A lot of people would get letters. And that was the other thing. They wouldn't go back online and check their accounts because FEMA did not communicate with you via phone or letters to your home. You had to go online. So they'd send you a letter and say, okay, you're claiming this. We need this additional information. Or we're going to give you $5,000, but if that's not enough, you can appeal this decision. Well, everybody's thinking appeal, right? It's such a big legal term. How do I appeal? And some people let it go past the 60-day mark. I did. I know I did. I let it go past. And that's when I spoke to, if I didn't have the relationship with the FEMA director, he said, it doesn't matter. I'm encouraging people to appeal no matter what. Personally, I think that there was so much still left on the table that, people didn't get what they should have by whatever happened, whatever errors happened. It's just like the Red Cross. I wouldn't know anything about the Red Cross except I sat with them at the Legion and I spoke to the head of the Red Cross there. And she said it was such an error in the beginning because we did flyovers and you can't see the damage, especially in homes that had internal damage. And so she said, we should have been on the island sooner. And that's when they came back and they were at the Legion. And that's why I encourage, because just like you were saying, Joanna, even neighbors here, we're not that bad. Somebody needs it more than us. Well, yeah, that's true, but you've been through it. I mean, whether you believe it or not, whether you realize it or not, this was a huge traumatic event. It was a huge dramatic storm. It was probably one of the worst in our country's history. You've got to, I think the first thing you have to do is realize you were a victim of this. Nobody wants to be a victim, but you were a victim. You had no choice. You were a victim. Now you can choose to stay the victim or you can help yourself. And that's where you have to go.
Yeah, I think the other thing, at least from our perspective, is and it's not good or bad, but the alphabet soup of the government and which agencies are there to help you. So not only the emotion that you talk about, but also not even the knowing where to start per se, like which organizations might we be qualified, or your pride that you alluded to as well. We're not that bad off, or we can figure out a way to fund it ourselves. So just even that help to let people know that things are available from different organizations. And you mentioned small business association. I think we got one letter saying that, we could apply for a loan, but it didn't make sense up front because, well, we're not a small business, we're a retired couple, but obviously somewhere within their remit, is the ability to loan after natural disaster. So I don't think that you want to spend your life trying to research what you get after a natural disaster, but one, happens. I think that's the other huge chasm for people is they don't even know where to start.
I think that's where I have to, if I were any agency, whoever was involved, I would look back and you would think, Katrina was one that really sticks in my mind. You think that was a huge learning curve, right? But you have to think these people, us, were just, you're shocked. You're shocked. Who knew that Sanibel Island was going underwater? I didn't. I was one of those people, and I think I told Joanna the story when we paid the house off. And originally we had a mortgage. So we had flood insurance and we had wind insurance because you had to. So I paid it off in 2021. And I said, I'm not going to pay this flood insurance. It's so high. It's really high. And Sanibel would have to be underwater for us to get any water. Yeah.
Famous last words.
So kind of it's your fault.
But, who knew? Who knew that Sanibel was actually going to go underwater? And then the insurance companies are a whole different aspect. And that's not my frustration because obviously I didn't have to deal with insurance companies. We did have homeowners. We just didn't have, for named storms, the flood and the wind. Our one vehicle was totaled because it was in the storm. And I will say our car insurance carrier was excellent. I mean, there was just no question it was done. But I can't even imagine that was the other thing people were going through is dealing with their insurance companies before they could even begin to do anything, Yeah,
you did how many countless days and hours just trying to follow up.
Yeah.
And then being and the people that would come out were obviously new, and then they would leave. So many of them just quit after a couple of weeks. They couldn't handle it. And I heard of people having to start over with pictures. When you said flood insurance, all I can think about is we have flood insurance, but it didn't matter. we didn't really get anything for flood insurance.
And to your point, I hope the look back or the review happens because thank God the Army Corps of Engineers tarped our roof. But we lived in limbo. And I understand there were like well over 70,000 people that applied to that program. And that's probably a fraction of what could have used their help. But every time I logged back on, once the internet came out, it was like pending or something. So just the communication, I didn't expect somebody to come right away, but I wanted to know that I was in the queue and that, I was on the list and somebody would be, which they eventually did a fantastic job. And we never got a drip of water in the house, thank God. But, that's the kind of thing that I think, other than the knowledge of organizations that you might need to work with, the fact that telling somebody that's in the middle of a natural disaster to go on the internet to check their status is not the most, because for a while, as you well know, everybody was on their mobile phones. And I'm sure some of the cell towers were not at 100%, if even up. And then everybody's on their mobile phones trying to talk to family, trying to get insurance worked out, and getting to a website just was completely impractical. But having said that, you've mentioned a couple of organizations. What all organizations have you been volunteering with and or assisting people with, just so we get the whole breadth of your contribution?
Well, it was originally the beginning was the Beacon of Hope. So I worked with the two women that were actually part of the Beacon of Hope and on their board of directors. And then Unite Florida was the other one that the state developed. It was kind of like their answer to FEMA. FEMA is a federally funded agency, and Unite Florida was a state-funded agency. And I think the reason that came into being was because of the trailers. There was that fight about, I'm not going to put a trailer here because you're in a flood zone. You only can have it for 6 months. Well, people were looking like, what are we supposed to do? So then Governor DeSantis said, no, we're going to come up with our program. And so between the two agencies, people have gotten trailers if they can put it on their property. In Matlacha, unfortunately, a lot of people cannot because it's such a small area. There was the Small Business Association. There was the Red Cross. There was on FEMA's website, and again, I'm used to government stuff. There is a whole litany of things that you could look at. If you were a veteran, you could go to Veteran Affairs. The Legion gave money to its members if they needed it. They would give out maybe $2,000 or $3,000 a person. So that was another thing people reached to. That's another reason why people have such a high community in those organizations, because they have that common bond. And veterans are huge on the island. I'm finding huge. So if you were a government worker, you could go and reach out to OPM. I mean, there was a lot, but just here on the island, FEMA, Unite Florida, the Red Cross, the Small Business Association, the debris pickup was huge. That's winding down now.
The Datsun, beautiful Datsun trucks.
They're winding down. They stopped taking applications as of March 29th. So anything now, if you didn't, put it online with them because FEMA was paying for it, it's on you. So that was another thing people were not clear about. And I have to say that was one of the biggest problems during the hurricane was communication. On Facebook, Kevin Russell is a person that really had facts. He was putting out facts, and it was a godsend to me, especially when you're not here, to find out what exactly is going on, because there's so many rumors. There's still so many rumors. I go and I look on Facebook is a huge community, right? So, there's things that people talk about and what you can do and what you can't do. I wish we had a more solid, we used to call them like a COOP plan. I wish we had more of solid COOP plan on the island. And it's hard because we're not incorporated. Mm-hmm. We're unincorporated, which I don't know if we'll ever be incorporated because that takes a lot of assets to do that, like Sanibel is, Fort Myers Beach is, but we don't have our own government. So you would think maybe the Greater Pine Island Civic Association will come up with a better coop, with key people in place. If this happens, and then you run through tabletop exercises. I wish, and then they're really kind of, sometimes they get to be annoying because we did a lot with them for the government, but it was better to be proactive than reactive. I remember one time we had something we thought was bird flu coming in on ships. And it's like, now that sounds really stupid, but when you have a bunch of dead birds coming in on a vessel, what do you do? And I'm talking like, how do we get the ambulances down there? How do we get, there's little tiny things. And who knew that the road was going to break up like that into the island? Who knew that? Nobody. Who knew everybody would be cut off who stayed, and I was in Georgia thinking, oh my God, if they don't open that road up, how am I going to get back?
But to your point on the rumors and the craving for facts, my favorite one was that the bridge was washed out. Well, technically, it was the roads up to the bridges. And yes, the island was impassable until that got corrected and so forth like that. But it was hard enough being here. I can't imagine being in Georgia and trying to sort through all that and have some sense of, well, there was really no sense of calm, I guess. That was kind of crazy, but you wanted something that you could kind of hang on to. And just the misinformation and the lack of communication. And so to your point, any kind of planning going forward. So at least you can't stop it from happening, but you can at least be responsive.
Right. And I think that, I'm sure the commissioners in Lee County have their thing going on. But again, the island is so unique that just like Fort Myers Beach, you have to have boots on the ground here. I hate using that term, but that's what I use. And you have to have these drills here. And I know they have groups with the commission. There's a commissioner, Kevin Ruan, who comes here and they do meetings. And it's open. I think it's open. Sometimes it's not open to, but we really do need to have a coop in place. If this happens, A happens, then B, C, D, E, F. You have to be able to do this. Now, this just happened to us last year. What do we do next time? How do we do this? I mean, it was one of the worst storms possible. What do we do? I know personally, I will have sandbags. I mean, I was so arrogant. I have to tell you, I was so arrogant with this storm. I've been through 2 other hurricanes in Georgia, but they were like Category 1. I mean, it was nothing like this. And I was very arrogant thinking, I will be this queen of sandbags learning how to, I don't know if it'll help, but I hope it would help some. I'll know what a go bag is. I mean, I should know better, right? I should have been more prepared to go. We waited till the very last minute to go. And I brought very little, because I'm thinking, we'll be back next day. No, it took at least a week, just to get the road open up. And then I came even later because I had the 2 dogs. If I wouldn't have had a really good friend in Georgia, a couple good friends in Georgia, and the man that I worked with all these years gave us his truck to use. So Mario my husband could come back here. And then he gave us his RV that we lived in for 3 months.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Adorable.
It was beautiful. And that's just how he rolls. But, if it weren't for that, I'm very fortunate. I don't even know how to thank people. I mean, thank you just seems kind of empty, right? I wish I had all the money in the world. I could just give it to people and say, thank you. To rent a place or rent a trailer is like $3,000 or $4,000 a month. And so we were extremely fortunate. The contractors that we had were great. There were a lot of fly-by-nights. That was another thing I saw in this neighborhood with a lot of the older, I'm old, but even older than that, people, because I think you're so devastated and someone knocks at your door and says, hey, we'll help you. Give us $20,000 and we'll be back. And they never came back. So I decided we were doing local only. Not that they're always great, but we were very fortunate that we had good people, honest people come in and help us get through whatever we were getting through. But looking at it now, there's so much that I would have done differently. And I probably should go to one of those meetings, to talk about these coops. But those tabletop exercises are so important, even if we did them like 4 times a year, because it has to be muscle memory. It has to be, if this happens, then how do we do this? How do you get sick people off the island? How do you do this? I mean, Williamson Brothers got people off, but that was by the grace of God, right? People were just getting boats here and there to come back on the island. So I think if they were more organized, it wouldn't be as scary. And the thing is, you have to include people. I don't know if they've been planning anything. I don't know if they've had planning. I know they have meetings. The Greater Pine Island Civic Association does have meetings. I've been to a couple where they talk about incorporation. I think that subject is probably a little bit too late because things are happening right now. But we need to protect ourselves, not just our homes, but we have to come up with plans. I mean, what if whoever, I don't even know who made the decision in the beginning to say, this island is uninhabitable for 6 months. I don't know who made that initial. I know that the commissioners voted for it. That was the story I got after the fact. And, how do you deal with that? If that would have went through, if they would have stopped, I mean, you were here, right? You stayed, but we were gone. So how do you do this? My house would have been done, obviously. Oh, did you leave too?
No, we left. We've been in too many hurricanes. We leave, but we were just over in in the Fort Lauderdale area over there. And when we saw on TV, as soon as they were saying looting, and we have a barky dog. No, we're coming back. And thank goodness for DeSantis, because he said, no, we would have been destroyed. All these homes would have been destroyed with black mold, and because everyone.
Believe it or not, crime still rolls. Yeah. Even in fact, they probably like it more in the face of disaster. And that's where, yes, we were very fortunate to have a governor that had better foresight and said, no, I think we're going to do it in 3 days. We're just going to get this built and we're going to be done.
And he did it. And he had all the, like the power guys. What did he call them? When you go out to the mailbox, you're going to see one in your yard. I forget what you call those guys that repair the power.
Yeah, I know.
But he did
FPL, well, we don't have FPL, but FPL was huge all through Cape Coral and Fort Myers. Yeah, we were very fortunate. Greater Pine Island Water Authority was great, because they didn't charge us until after the first of the year. We had a lot of good things, but they're not solid. I believe that you have to get this down, because what if Governor DeSantis isn't here anymore? What if you have different entity? What if you have a different administration? These are things that shouldn't be, but are. They are factors. And, it's really, and I hope that we never have to go through this again. I hope not to this extent, but it's certainly something that I've become more aware of, and everybody here. I mean, it's sad we're losing people. We're losing neighbors that are selling. I just spoke to one of our people down on Bracci, and she's under contract, going to Punta Gorda. Yeah. Because, when you're older, I don't even know how these people, especially in their 80s, they're in their mid 80s, they lose their home, or their home is so destroyed. Who has the energy, number one, to even, how am I going to start over again? If you don't have resources like family, what are you going to do? So that's why I think there should be more planning on the emergency side of it.
So what if people still need help? What would be your advice to them today?
Right now, we slowed down. We used to be at the office Mondays and Wednesdays and sometimes Fridays. But because traffic has slowed down, we decided it would be by appointment. So if you go to the Beacon of Hope, on their door, it'll have a number that you call, or you can go inside the office and tell them that, you need help with whatever related to the disaster. And they'll reach out to one of the two women that I worked with. And then I'm still here. A couple of the volunteers are part-time, but I said, I'm more than happy to come back and help people do what we need to do. So there's still that, the Beacon of Hope. I think the Beacon of Hope even still has, on Fridays, they called it a coffee clutch, for people to talk about the issues that they're going through as far as their emotionally PTSD kind of related issues from the hurricane. And there were two psychologists running that group, which is key. Whether, I don't think there's one person that went through this that didn't have some kind of psychological effect. Somebody just told me a story the other day. A couple stayed that were off of Sanibel Boulevard. The woman is so traumatized, she won't come back on the island. Her and her husband sold the home as is, didn't care because it was so bad. I mean, I can't even imagine water rising. They lost both their dogs. Because you think you can handle water, but you can't handle water because it comes hard and fast, right? And this storm was not forgiving at all. So yeah, I think that's still going on there. As far as getting items that you need, appliances, I know some people are still, wanting appliances or furniture. You can reach out to, the Beacon's been a very good source of information. I know the Matt Lachey Hookers did a lot with building supplies, but they all kind of work together in that respect. But I have such a big respect for the Beacon of Hope because I didn't realize how much they did over there. It looks like a tiny little strip mall, but it's amazing the meals that they give out, the money that they give, especially for if you can't afford your medical issues, there's a lot that goes on there. So the best thing to do, you go to the office, there's caseworkers there and they're able to direct you what you need to do.
Yeah, they'll tell you, oh, you need to call this guy, or this is how you get a trailer. Yeah, that's nice.
It's an amazing group. I never realized how far reaching, and the people on the board are very, they're influencers. They have the means to reach out to whatever is needed. So I would obviously say, Beacon of Hope. I know FEMA's still at the VFW. I know there's a small contingency of people there that you can still go to. And there may be an SBA person there too. The SBA was a good thing. I mean, the rates were low. The interest rates were low, but it was a loan. And you did have to pay that back.
Okay. Well, that might be good for some people.
Yeah. As long as, if it went over $25,000, then you had to give your house as collateral, which is tough, So a lot of people may have needed more than 25, but it's hard to, and I have no knowledge of how loans work through the banks or lines of credit. I've never done it before. But I guess in comparison with the interest rate, it was relatively low with the Small Business Association.
Any plans to travel now that this is over?
It's funny. My daughter had, I had planned to go back. My daughter lives in Texas, so I planned to go there when she had her third child, right around the storm, and I couldn't go. So I finally got to see the baby in January, which is a great thing. But I am going to be going in May, beginning of May. I have 3 very good friends. Very good friends I've known since I was probably 4 years old, back in Pennsylvania. And we're going to start doing a girls' trip once a year because I think it's important that we not only just visit each other at our homes, but we need to get away because life is short, right? We're all getting older, and I think it's a good thing to reconnect with people. Other than that, I really don't have any plans to travel. The COVID thing still has loomed.
Well, thank you Very,
Oh, God,
very
thank you.
much.
I'm
This
very
was so
honored
Oh.
that you even wanted to talk to me.
Oh, this was so enjoyable.
I could go on and tell you story and probably need like a 5-part series on
It could be.
on things
What
you
a
don't
good
want to
idea.
know.
No. We could have a whole bunch of
Things I can't tell you, but I could. Yeah. Well, technically, when you separate, you're not supposed to talk about things, but some things are just too good to talk. I mean, there are things you never thought you would talk about your entire life. That's probably why we're all crazy.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed our Pine Island Experience podcast. If you have any ideas for us, people to interview, or any comments, please feel free to email them to us at pineislandexperience@gmail.com. That's pineislandexperience, all one word, @gmail.com. Don't forget to like us, and you may subscribe to this podcast using all the major catchers like Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks again for listening, and remember, island life is a constant vacation. We'll see you on the next podcast.